Welcome to Fluent Daily, the English listening channel for advanced learners at B2 and C1 level. Every episode features a rich, flowing conversation in natural English on a topic that is genuinely worth thinking about: history, psychology, science, philosophy, and more. There are no simplified sentences here, no slow speech, no vocabulary drills. Just real English spoken naturally on ideas that matter. This is Fluent Daily. Let's get into it.
Today we have a great story, so let's get started right now.
Picture this scenario because, if you are an intermediate or advanced learner of English, or frankly any second language really, you have absolutely lived this nightmare.
Oh yeah, it's universally dreaded.
Right. So you're sitting in a meeting at work, or, maybe you're out at a loud, crowded dinner party. The conversation around the table is flowing rapidly, just ping-ponging from person to person.
Moving fast.
Exactly. And you're listening to the English being spoken. And here's the crucial part. You understand it perfectly.
Right, you're not lost at all.
No, not at all. You aren't struggling to comprehend the vocabulary. In fact, you know exactly what you want to say in response to the person across from you. You have this, brilliant point to make.
A perfect counter-argument.
Yes, or maybe just a really well-timed, witty joke. But right in that critical, fleeting moment, right before the words are supposed to actually come out of your mouth, your brain just, it hits a brick wall. The system pauses.
The classic freeze.
Yeah. You conceptualize the entire brilliant thought in your native language first. Then, internally, like frantically sweating a little bit under the collar, you attempt to translate that thought into English in real time.
And we all know how that goes.
Right, because by the time you've finished assembling that translated sentence in your head, checked it for grammatical errors, made sure you have the right preposition, and finally opened your mouth to speak, the conversation is completely moved on.
The moment is dead.
It's completely dead. You just sit there in silence, swallowing your brilliant point. Or worse, you decide to force it out anyway, like 3 seconds too late, and it sounds incredibly stilted, overly formal, and just totally unnatural.
It really is a profoundly isolating feeling. You're surrounded by people, you technically have all the knowledge required to participate, but you're trapped behind this invisible glass wall.
Yes, exactly.
And I think the most important thing to establish right away is that this is not a personal failing. It's a universal biological hurdle in second language acquisition.
It makes you feel like a total imposter, though. I remember studying Spanish for years, getting to a point where I could read novels, but sitting at a taco stand in Mexico City, I would completely freeze when the vendor asked me a simple, unexpected question.
Oh, the unexpected questions are the worst for that.
They really are. You have all this vocabulary stored up. You know the grammar rules. You technically know enough of the language to, dominate that dinner party conversation. But that frantic internal translation process makes you feel like a day one beginner.
It really does.
So that is our mission for this deep dive. We are unpacking what linguists and neuroscientists call the translation bottleneck.
A very fitting name.
Right. We're going to explore the mechanics of why fast conversational English is so notoriously difficult to process and produce in real time, why this barrier exists for almost every advanced learner out there, and most importantly, the specific, highly actionable protocols you can use to permanently rewire your brain for automatic fluency.
Because the goal is to get you completely operating in English, right, out of the native language entirely.
Exactly. So to set the foundation for how we actually achieve that rewiring, we have to kind of fundamentally reframe how you look at that moment of freezing at the dinner party.
Yeah, because when you experience that feeling of being stuck, the immediate overwhelming instinct is to just blame your vocabulary size.
Oh, totally. You walk away thinking, if I just knew 20 more adjectives, I wouldn't have frozen.
Right. Or you blame your grasp of the present perfect continuous tense or something. But that diagnosis is actually entirely incorrect.
Wait, really?
Yeah. The feeling of being stuck in real-time conversation is almost never a vocabulary problem, and it is rarely a grammar problem. It's an information routing problem.
Okay, I want to make sure I'm fully grasping that distinction. When you say it's a routing problem rather than a vocabulary problem, you're saying, the data is on the hard drive, but the processor just can't find the file fast enough.
That is a highly accurate way to look at it, yeah. The raw materials, the words, the syntactical rules, the abstract concepts, they're already securely stored in your memory. The bottleneck is the physical, neurological mechanism your brain is utilizing to retrieve and deploy them. Specifically, it comes down to which language your brain's default internal monologue is running in.
So the background operating system, basically.
Exactly. Right now, your fundamental operating system is running in your native language. You are essentially trying to run an English software application on top of a Spanish or Mandarin or German operating system.
Wow, okay. That paints a picture.
Right. So every single piece of auditory input has to be routed through your native language's neural network to be assigned meaning. And every single thought you want to output has to be routed back through that same native network to be spoken.
And that routing takes time.
It takes literal physical time. That diversion of the electrical signal in your brain causes a delay.
So that literal translation step, that momentary detour into the native language, is what acts as the bottleneck. I mean, this is what language teachers are talking about when they say a student has hit the B2 or C1 wall, right?
Precisely. You've graduated past the beginner stages. You've hoarded all the raw materials. But you just can't seem to deploy them at the speed of real, messy human life.
Let's break down the anatomy of that specific moment I described in the intro, because looking at the exact sequence of events is crucial. When an advanced learner hits this wall, what is actually happening in those 2 seconds of silence?
Well, the learner perceives the situation, right? Someone asks them a question, they conceptualize a thought or a response, but they conceptualize that response entirely in their first language, which we refer to as their L1.
Okay, the L1.
Then they take that fully formed L1 concept and they push it through a mental translation filter into their second language, their L2 in this case, English. They're actively searching for equivalent labels.
And that's where the delay happens.
Exactly. Because only after that translation is complete, and usually after a quick internal review for errors, do they initiate the physical motor function of speaking.
And the real-world ramifications of that sequence are devastating, because human conversation is just ruthless. It does not wait for a translation delay.
It really doesn't. The natural cadence of native human speech is astonishingly fast when you actually measure it. Turn-taking in a fluid, casual conversation often happens in fractions of a second.
Fractions of a second.
Yeah, there are even studies showing that in some cultures, people begin formulating their response and predicting the end of the speaker's sentence before the speaker has even finished talking.
That's crazy.
The gaps between speakers are sometimes just a few hundred milliseconds. So if your internal processing takes a full second and a half because you're forcing every concept through a translation filter,
You're mathematically excluded from the conversation.
exactly. You are mathematically excluded from the natural rhythm of the dialogue. You will always be a beat behind.
I keep picturing this like trying to play a highly competitive, fast-paced video game, but your controller has a half-second lag.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Right. Like if you are playing a fighting game, you're looking at the screen, you know exactly what your opponent is doing, you know the exact combination of buttons to press to dodge their attack and land your own.
Yeah.
The strategy in your head is flawless.
But the hardware betrays you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You press the jump button, and the character on screen just stands there for half a second while the hardware processes the input. And in that half second, the entire state of the game has changed. Your opponent has moved. The opening's gone.
Yeah.
That processing delay completely ruins your performance, and you get destroyed, even though your underlying knowledge of the game was actually perfect.
The video game lag metaphor captures the frustration perfectly because it isolates the actual failure point. In the game, your reaction time isn't the problem, and your intelligence isn't the problem. The hardware's translation of your physical input into a digital action is the problem.
It's a mechanical failure.
Right. And in language learning, your intelligence, your grasp of the topic being discussed, and even your theoretical knowledge of English aren't the problem. Your brain's chosen processing route is the problem.
Wow.
Furthermore, when you finally do produce that delayed response, when your character finally jumps, so to speak, it usually lands awkwardly. This is because natural idiomatic speech simply does not survive the translation process intact.
Horrible. I see this constantly. Phrasing, idioms, the cultural rhythm of how people actually talk. None of that survives a direct word-for-word translation from, say, French or Japanese into English.
It really doesn't.
You end up sounding like a 19th century diplomat reading from a treaty, rather than a normal person having a casual chat over beers.
You might construct a sentence that is grammatically flawless according to a university textbook, but it sounds pragmatically bizarre to a native speaker's ear.
Right.
But there's a nuance here that often gets overlooked, and it causes learners to fundamentally misunderstand their own capabilities. Thinking in a second language is not a binary switch.
What do you mean, not a binary switch? I feel like most people assume you either have the magical ability to think in English or you just don't.
It's not a rigid situation where you either entirely think in English or you entirely think in your native language. It operates on a spectrum.
Okay, the spectrum. Explain that a bit more.
Well, the translation process makes you feel like an absolute failure across the board. It tricks you into believing you don't know the language at all, even when you possess massive amounts of stored knowledge. But pay attention to your daily life.
Okay.
You might be able to process simple greetings like, "How are you? Good morning," instantly, without any translation. You hear it, you comprehend it, you reply, all in automatic English.
Oh, yeah. Nobody translates hello after the first week.
Exactly. But the moment the topic shifts to something complex, like explaining a nuanced political opinion or a technical problem at work, you instantly slide back down the spectrum and revert to the translation filter.
That makes a lot of sense.
The ultimate goal of fluency isn't flipping a single switch. It's pushing more and more domains of your language use along that spectrum, away from translation and towards direct automatic thought.
Okay, so if this is fundamentally a processing delay, like a hardware lag in our biological controller, we really need to look under the hood.
Let's do it.
We need to understand the physical reality of what the brain is doing during that half-second lag. What does the neuroscience of bilingual processing actually look like?
When we look at functional MRI scans, neurological research on bilingual processing, we see two very distinct modes of second language use that utilize entirely different neural pathways.
Okay.
The first is what we call controlled processing mode. This is the mode that almost all adult learners begin in, and unfortunately, it's where many get permanently stuck. It is the mediated route.
The mediated route, meaning there's a middleman involved in the transaction.
Yes. The native language, the L1, is acting as the middleman. The speaker conceptualizes an idea in their L1, translates it to their L2, and then produces it. Neurologically, this involves two entirely separate encoding stages.
Two stages, so my brain is doing double the work.
Exactly. First, you are firing the established neural networks for your native language to form the abstract concept. Then, you are forcing activation in a separate set of neural networks for English to find the matching lexical labels.
That sounds exhausting.
Oh, it gets worse. Because both languages are active in the brain simultaneously, they compete. Your brain actually has to expend significant cognitive energy actively suppressing the native language so the English words can surface. This is a phenomenon known as competing inhibition.
Wait, so my brain is actively fighting itself. It's trying to push the English forward while simultaneously having to shove the native language down so it doesn't accidentally slip out.
That is the literal physical reality of the controlled processing mode. Because it involves these two encoding stages and the constant battle of competing inhibition, it is inherently slower, it is incredibly effortful, and it is highly error-prone.
I mean, this completely explains the physical exhaustion. Anyone who has moved to a new country and tried to function in a second language knows this feeling.
The brain fog.
Yeah. You come home at 5 p.m. and you don't just feel mentally tired, you feel like you ran a marathon. Your brain is essentially doing double the processing work of a native speaker, plus fighting a constant internal wrestling match.
It is literal, measurable cognitive overload. Your frontal lobe is working in overdrive to manage the inhibition.
Wow.
Now, contrast that chaotic environment with the second mode, automatic processing mode. This is the mode that characterizes fluent, highly proficient bilinguals.
Okay, so how does that one work?
In automatic processing, you are bypassing the L1 entirely. The speaker conceptualizes the abstract thought and produces it in the L2 simultaneously using the exact same biological mechanisms you use in your native language.
So no middleman.
Right. The abstract concept maps directly to the English vocabulary without ever touching the native language neural network. There is no middleman, and therefore there is very little competing inhibition to manage.
Okay, I have a major question here, and this might challenge how a lot of adult learners approach their daily studies.
Let's hear it.
We always hear in neuroscience that neural pathways are strengthened by repetition. The whole neurons that fire together wire together concept. Myelination, right?
Yes, wrapping the pathways in insulation to make the signals travel faster.
Exactly. So does that mean that every single time a learner hits a wall in a sentence and uses translation as a crutch to help themselves get through it, they are actively sabotaging their long-term automaticity?
Yes, that is the unavoidable biological truth. And honestly, it is a very bitter pill for many diligent learners to swallow.
Oh, man. So let's say I'm stuck trying to formulate a sentence. I pause, I quickly jump back to my native language in my head to figure out the correct grammar structure. I translate it to English, and then I speak it. I usually feel a sense of relief because I successfully communicated the idea.
Right, you got the point across.
But you're telling me I'm not just using a helpful temporary crutch. I'm actually digging the wrong neural trench deeper.
You are paving the wrong road. Every single time you use the translation route, the direct pathway, the automatic, unmediated pathway you actually desperately want to build, is completely bypassed.
It gets nothing.
It receives no electrical signal. It doesn't get used, so it doesn't get myelinated. It remains weak. Meanwhile, the mediated pathway, the translation pathway, gets flooded with activity and reinforced.
So the brain just builds whatever you do most.
The human brain is ruthlessly efficient. It strengthens whatever it does most often, regardless of your long-term goals. If you practice translating in your head every day, you will become a remarkably fast and efficient internal translator.
But not a fluent speaker.
Exactly. You will never become a fluid, automatic English speaker because you are building the wrong biological infrastructure.
That is a staggering paradigm shift. It completely changes how you have to view those moments of hesitation. You aren't just pausing to find a word. You are standing at a literal fork in the road in your brain, choosing which neural pathway to feed electricity to.
It is a biological choice in that moment, and this ties into another fascinating, often misunderstood aspect of bilingual neuroscience. These direct pathways are heavily domain-specific.
Domain-specific, meaning your fluency depends entirely on the context of what you're talking about.
Exactly. The brain doesn't just have one giant overarching English switch that flips on and off. It builds distinct neural pathways based on specific contexts, environments, and vocabulary clusters.
Oh, wow.
This explains a phenomenon that utterly baffles many advanced learners and makes them doubt their own abilities. You might have a high-level professional, say a software engineer, or a marketing director who can sit in a 3-hour corporate strategy meeting, speak entirely in English, debate complex technical specifications, and they are completely in automatic processing mode.
They're totally fluent at work.
They are thinking in English, but the moment they leave the office, go to a coffee shop, and try to tell a coworker about a deeply emotional argument they had with their spouse that morning, they completely freeze.
They lose all their English.
They entirely default to their native language and have to start translating every word.
I've seen this happen. I have friends who are brilliant in English at work, but the second we talk about childhood memories, they just stumble. And it makes total sense now.
Yep.
They have built incredibly strong, highly myelinated, direct neural pathways for business jargon. They've fired the connections for Q3 revenue projections or agile development cycles thousands of times without ever translating them.
Paved like a highway.
Right. But the vocabulary for personal vulnerability, for deep emotional states, just hasn't been practiced directly.
The biological infrastructure for let's pivot our market strategy is fully built. The biological infrastructure for I felt profoundly betrayed when you undermined me simply doesn't exist yet in the direct English pathway. It's a dirt path.
So the brain just avoids the dirt path.
Exactly. So the brain, needing to process that highly complex emotional concept rapidly, instantly defaults to the strongest available route, which is the native language network.
Okay, so if the science so clearly shows that the direct route, the automatic processing mode, is the only actual biological way to achieve true fluency, and that translating actively harms that goal by reinforcing the wrong pathways, why do so many advanced, highly motivated learners stubbornly cling to translating in their heads? I mean, nobody wants to be slow and stilted.
No one wants to be slow, but human beings deeply, fundamentally crave comfort. And that brings us to the psychology of the habit. The translation habit persists not because learners are lazy, but because of two incredibly powerful psychological traps.
Okay, let's hear them.
The first, as you just alluded to, is the comfort trap.
The brain seeking the path of least resistance.
Exactly. Forming abstract thoughts in your first language is utterly, beautifully effortless. The conceptual work is deeply wired from decades of daily use since childhood. Your brain knows exactly how to navigate those L1 pathways without expending any extra glucose.
Right.
When you are under time pressure in a fast conversation, or you are feeling social anxiety because you're talking to a superior, the brain wants to conserve energy.
Oh, I mean, if you're nervous because you're talking to your boss, your brain is already dedicating a massive amount of cognitive energy to managing your physiological anxiety, your heart rate, your tone of voice.
You're busy.
Right. It simply doesn't want to spend extra energy forging a new, unpaved neural pathway for English syntax. It just grabs the L1 concept because it's right there, it's easy, and it feels safe.
It immediately defaults to the path of least resistance to save you from cognitive collapse. That is the comfort trap. But the second psychological trap is even more insidious, specifically for intermediate and advanced learners. It is what linguists call the accuracy trap.
The accuracy trap. I feel like I might be guilty of this one.
A lot of people are. Advanced learners, the B2 and C1 students, have typically spent years investing significant time, money, and emotional effort into mastering grammar rules and vocabulary accuracy.
We've all taken the tests.
Exactly. They have taken tests. They have been graded. Because of this educational trauma, frankly, they care deeply about being correct. They begin to obsessively over-monitor their output.
Over-monitoring. It's like they have a little internal editor standing over their shoulder with a red pen, scrutinizing every syllable before it leaves their mouth.
They want to check their English against an internal theoretical standard of absolute correctness before they dare to produce it out loud in front of another human being. Translation facilitates this monitoring perfectly. It adds a comfortable, built-in review stage to the speaking process.
Oh, I see the mechanism now. You produce the thought in your native language. You translate it into English in the safety of your own mind. You run that English sentence through your mental grammar checker to make sure the verb agrees with the subject.
And only then do you speak.
Right. And only when you are 100% sure it is perfect do you actually speak it.
Thinking directly in English, on the other hand, feels incredibly risky to these learners. When you bypass the native language, you completely bypass that review stage.
The safety net is gone.
The internal monitoring step is drastically reduced, which means errors are much more likely to slip through and surface in real-time production. You might use the wrong preposition, you might mess up a conditional tense, or you might mispronounce a vowel because you are speaking at the raw speed of thought.
It sounds exactly like a kid using training wheels on a bicycle.
I love that analogy.
When you have the training wheels on, which represents that translation and internal review stage, it feels incredibly safe. You can check your balance, you can pedal slowly, you can look around, and you are guaranteed not to fall down by making a catastrophic grammar mistake.
To an outside observer, you look like you're riding a bike.
But you aren't actually engaging with the physics of riding.
Exactly. You can never actually ride fast, you can never lean into a sharp corner, you can never keep up with the other kids until you take those training wheels off. And when you do finally take them off, you have to accept that you are going to wobble.
And you will wobble.
You might even scrape your knee. The scrape is like the social embarrassment of using the wrong word in front of a native speaker. But falling down is the only way the brain actually learns the physics of balancing.
That is so true. The fear of making real-time errors, the paralyzing fear of that social wobble, makes learners think they aren't ready to think in English.
They try it, panic, and quit. They try it for a minute. They experience the intense discomfort of speaking without that internal review stage. They make a silly mistake they normally wouldn't make on a written test, and they mistakenly interpret that necessary discomfort as a giant warning sign.
Oh no, my English is getting worse.
Exactly. They think, I sounded like an idiot. I better retreat back to translating in my head to make sure I'm accurate.
When in biological reality, that wobble, that slightly embarrassing mistake made at natural speaking speed, is the exact undeniable proof that they are doing it right. They are finally firing electrical signals down the direct pathway.
They're prioritizing pathway activation over surface-level accuracy. But psychologically, letting go of that perfect accuracy is terrifying for an adult who has measured their entire language progress by how well they score on grammar quizzes.
Okay, so we know we have to ditch the training wheels. We know we have to accept the wobble, the scrapes, the discomfort, and the absolute certainty of making real-time mistakes. Knowing all of that theory, how do we actually execute this?
The protocol.
Right. What is the most direct, practical, daily protocol to start rewiring that default language? How do we force the brain to abandon the comfortable native language and pave these direct English pathways?
This brings us to the core practical application, the daily work of this rewiring process. The deliberate cultivation of an English internal monologue.
The internal monologue technique.
If you want to think in English during a fast-paced, high-pressure conversation with a client, you have to practice thinking in English when you are completely alone and the stakes are zero.
Makes sense.
This means actively, deliberately narrating, describing, and thinking through your everyday situations in English in your own head.
So you are literally just talking to yourself in your mind?
Yes. But it needs to be highly structured. We discussed earlier how pathways are domain-specific and how the brain always defaults to comfort.
Right, the dirt paths versus the highways.
Because of this, you cannot just wake up on a Tuesday and decide, I'm going to think about the complexities of my emotional childhood trauma in English today.
You'd crash immediately.
You will fail within 30 seconds. You will get frustrated and you will quit. The cognitive load is too high. You have to scale the practice, starting with a low-stakes narration and slowly moving toward high-stakes reflection.
Let's start at the very bottom of that scale. What does low-stakes narration actually look like in a normal person's morning?
Low-stakes narration is about describing your immediate physical actions and your sensory environment as you are experiencing them. It requires very little abstract cognitive load.
Okay, give me an example.
For example, you wake up and walk into your kitchen. Internally, in English, you consciously force the thoughts, I'm going to make coffee, the floor is cold, I need to reach up and get my blue mug out of the cabinet, I am pouring the water.
I have to stop you there and push back a little, or at least ask for some deep validation for the listeners who are going to try this.
I know what you're going to say.
Because when you actually attempt this, especially at the beginning, it feels incredibly awkward. It feels profoundly exhausting, and frankly, it feels patronizingly basic.
It does.
You are a highly educated adult with a complex inner life, and suddenly your internal voice sounds like a toddler reading a cardboard picture book. I am holding a mug, the mug is blue, the water is hot. Is it normal that this feels so rudimentary and tiring?
It is more than normal. It is completely biologically necessary, and feeling that specific awkwardness and exhaustion is the entire point of the exercise.
Really?
Go back to the neuroscience we discussed. When you are internally narrating the mug is blue in English without translating it from your native language first, you are forcing an electrical signal down a very weak, unmyelinated, unpaved neural pathway. The brain resists this.
So the tiredness is just resistance.
That feeling of mental fatigue, that feeling of your brain being heavy, is the literal physical sensation of that direct neural pathway firing instead of being bypassed.
So the fatigue isn't a sign that you're bad in English. The fatigue is the biological proof that the workout is actually happening. It's like muscle soreness after lifting weights.
Exactly. You aren't doing this basic narration to write beautiful, profound poetry in your head. You are doing this to force pathway activation without demanding complex linguistics that would overwhelm the system and trigger a retreat to the native language.
Right.
Every single time you form the thought, the floor is cold, directly in English, you are laying down a microscopic layer of biological infrastructure on that direct route.
Okay, I love that reframing. We accept feeling like a toddler for a few weeks to build the highway. So that's the low-stakes physical narration. How do we eventually scale this up to high-stakes reflection? How do we build the pathways for the hard stuff, the abstract emotional domains?
Once the physical narration becomes less exhausting, we move from narrating the external world to narrating the internal world. A highly effective, proven technique for this is keeping a specific type of English journal at the end of the day.
Oh, nice.
But I want to be very clear about the parameters of this journal. This is not a formal essay. You are not practicing your academic writing. This must be a stream of consciousness, completely unmonitored, messy dump of your thoughts and feelings onto the page in English.
So you aren't allowed to check your grammar. You aren't allowed to look up words to make sure you sound smart.
Zero editing allowed. If you are writing about a fight you had and you don't know the exact English word for a specific feeling of resentment, you cannot look it up in your native language dictionary.
You just have to guess.
You must force yourself to talk around it using the English words you do have available. You might have to write, I felt a bad fire in my stomach because he didn't listen.
Wow, that sounds clumsy.
It sounds clumsy, but the goal is to force the brain to process emotional concepts using only the English pathways currently available to it. Over time, this intense struggle forces the brain to build direct connections in those difficult emotional domains.
Is there actual empirical data backing up the effectiveness of this internal monologue stuff? I mean, it sounds very logical, but does it produce measurable results in real-world fluency?
It does. There is a fascinating body of research by a linguist named Vera Soprana and her colleagues. They conducted studies specifically looking at internal language use in multilinguals.
What did they find?
They found that even brief, deliberate switching of the internal monologue to the second language produces measurable, statistically significant increases in spontaneous production fluency over a surprisingly short period, often just a matter of weeks.
Weeks? That's incredibly fast for anything related to language acquisition.
It is fast because you have to remember, you aren't acquiring new grammatical knowledge in these exercises. You are simply optimizing the routing of existing knowledge.
Oh, that makes sense.
By forcing the internal monologue into English, even for just 10 or 15 minutes a day while making coffee or stream of consciousness journaling, you are warming up and priming those direct pathways. When you then enter a real conversation later that day, the pathways are already primed to fire, making it much easier to bypass the native language entirely.
So we have the internal monologue technique. We are narrating our copy making. We are journaling our messy feelings without editing. But here is the logical wall I keep hitting as we talk about this.
Okay, what is it?
You cannot internally narrate your thoughts in English if you do not have the English concepts deeply wired into your brain in the first place. If I literally don't know the word for mug, I can't think it no matter how hard I try to force my internal monologue. We need the raw building blocks. And that realization completely changes how we must consume the language, right?
This is the vital second half of the equation. You cannot solve the translation bottleneck through sheer willpower alone. You can't just force yourself to think in English if the mental representations of those English concepts are weak, fragmented, or non-existent.
Right.
You need complete automatic mental representations of English concepts. And to understand how to build those, we have to revisit a monumental shift in linguistics. Stephen Krashen's comprehensible input hypothesis.
Let's do a deep dive into Krashen, because this is foundational. Comprehensible input is essentially the theory that we acquire language not by studying rules, parsing grammar, and memorizing lists, but simply by understanding messages.
Exactly. To understand why Krashen was so revolutionary, you have to look at how language used to be taught. For decades, the dominant model was the grammar translation method, which was largely based on how people learned dead languages like Latin.
Right, rote memorization.
You studied the rules, you conjugated the verbs, and you translated texts back and forth. Krashen completely disrupted this. He argued that true language acquisition is a subconscious process.
Okay, subconscious.
If you want to build a direct, unbreakable conceptual link between the physical idea of a cup and the English word mug, you cannot just memorize a rule. You need to encounter the word mug hundreds of times in meaningful, comprehensible contexts.
Meaningful context is the key phrase there.
Yes, you need to read it in a novel where a character is nervously gripping a hot mug of coffee. You need to hear it on a podcast about pottery. You need to see a character point to it in a movie.
So it's about volume.
Volume and context. Through massive, repeated, contextual exposure, your brain acts as a pattern recognition machine. It automatically maps the auditory sound of the word mug to the physical concept of the object, completely bypassing your native language.
This is where I'm going to push back incredibly hard on behalf of millions of language learners, because this Krashen theory contradicts how, 90% of adults study vocabulary today.
I know, it's a huge shift.
Learners absolutely love their flashcards. There's a whole industry built on this. People spend hours every day on apps where the English word is on the front of the digital card and the direct native language translation is on the back. Are we sitting here right now telling them to throw those flashcards away?
It's controversial, but...
Are we saying they should guess the meaning of every single word from context forever and never ever look up a word in their native language dictionary again?
We have to be very precise with the nuance here because abandoning all tools isn't practical. Looking up a translation in a bilingual dictionary is not a sin. It is often a highly efficient way to solve a momentary comprehension roadblock so you can get back to reading your book.
Okay, so dictionaries are still allowed.
But, and this is a massive, crucial but, a translation must be used strictly as a confirmation of a meaning you have already tried to infer from context. It cannot, under any circumstances, be the primary way you acquire the word.
Break down the mechanics of why. What is physically happening in my brain when I sit down and study a list of 50 advanced English words with their Spanish translations right next to them?
When you study vocabulary via direct translation on a flashcard, you are actively, biologically reinforcing the mediated route we discussed earlier.
The middleman again.
Yes. You are wiring the English word directly to the Spanish word in your brain's neural network, rather than wiring the English word to the real-world abstract concept. So a month later, when you try to use that English word in a spontaneous conversation, your brain has to fetch the Spanish word first, because that is literally how the file was saved on the hard drive.
So the translation-based flashcard, which feels like you are studying hard, is literally building the exact bottleneck we're trying to destroy. You are paying for the cement to build the wall that is blocking you.
You are cementing the translation habit with every swipe of the flashcard. But consider the alternative. If you encounter a new, unknown word in a fantasy novel, and you look at the surrounding sentence and you think, okay, based on the context of the character yelling and throwing something, I guess this word means frustrated, and then you open your dictionary just to confirm your guess.
You've done the work yourself.
Exactly. You have just engaged the direct conceptual pathway. The dictionary is just a quick safety check, a seatbelt. It is not the engine of your learning.
Okay, so if we are abandoning translation-based flashcards and grammar drills as our primary tools, what replaces them? Is it really just reading and listening?
It is extensive input. Reading and listening at a massive, almost industrial scale. And we need to set brutally honest expectations here for the listeners. Building these direct conceptual links, pouring the concrete for this biological infrastructure, requires thousands of hours of meaningful exposure.
Thousands of hours. I can hear people groaning right now. That sounds incredibly daunting for a busy adult.
It can sound daunting initially, but I actually argue it should be viewed as profoundly clarifying. It removes the mystery and the anxiety from language learning.
How so?
When you finally internalize that fluency isn't about finding a magic grammar trick or having a special language gene, but simply about putting in the biological reps, it is liberating.
Oh, I see.
Every single hour you spend listening to an engaging English podcast on your commute or watching a Netflix show or reading an article about a topic you love is a physical investment in your brain's biological infrastructure. You are physically building the pathways that will eventually allow you to think in English.
It's like pouring concrete for a foundation. You can't rush the curing process. You can't fake it. You just have to pour the volume. Okay, so extensive input builds the infrastructure. We are pouring the concrete. But if you just pour concrete, you just have a flat slab. To actually force that infrastructure to perform at speed, to make it functional in the real chaotic world, you have to put it under severe pressure.
And this is exactly where we transition from input to output. This is why speaking practice is a completely distinct, neurologically separate mechanism from listening and reading.
Let's get deeply into this because a lot of introverted learners think if I just listen to enough podcasts, if I just read enough books for the next 2 years, eventually I will be able to speak perfectly without ever practicing it. But that's a myth, isn't it?
It is a pervasive myth. Input is absolutely necessary, but it is not sufficient for spontaneous fluency. When you are forced to speak in real time, say in a language exchange or a live conversation with a tutor or a high-stakes meeting, a completely different neurological demand is placed on the brain.
Because of the speed.
Exactly. Remember, the translation route we keep talking about is slow. When you have a human being staring at you, making eye contact, waiting for a response, the translation route is simply too slow to function.
So the time pressure itself is the catalyst.
The time pressure of a live conversation forces your brain into a corner. It forces it to abandon the slow, comfortable native language translation route and frantically search for any available direct English pathway to get the point across before the social window closes.
This is a huge paradigm-shifting insight for me. So that feeling of mild panic you get when you're forced to speak fast, when you're trying to keep up with a native speaker, and you feel your heart racing and you're sweating, that panic isn't a sign that you are failing.
No, not at all.
It is actually the exact mechanism that forces your brain to bypass your native language. Because the alternative to finding that direct pathway is just awkward, excruciating silence.
That is precisely the mechanism at work. The biological stress of the moment tells the brain, the old way is too slow, we will fail socially if we translate, we must use the direct route even if it's messy and ungrammatical.
Wow.
This is why speaking prioritizes automaticity over accuracy, and it is fundamentally why speaking is entirely different from writing.
Right, because when you are writing an email, you have all the time in the world. You can write a sentence, realize it sounds weird, hit backspace, translate it back to your native language, Google a grammar rule, and try again. Writing allows you to indulge and coddle the translation habit indefinitely.
Writing allows you to hide in the mediated route. Speaking strips away that hiding place. This is why you constantly see university students who write beautiful, complex, C1 level academic essays, but who completely stumble over ordering a basic coffee in a cafe.
They've never practiced the speed.
They've built massive passive infrastructure, but they have never forced their brain into the crucible of real-time time pressure.
So what do you say to the learner listening right now who says, I understand the theory, but I'm going to wait to start doing language exchanges or conversation practice until I feel a little more comfortable. I just need a few more months of studying vocabulary, maybe finish one more grammar book, and then I'll be ready to speak without translating.
I say that they are trapped in a profound misunderstanding of cause and effect. They are waiting for the outcome of the practice to arrive before they do the practice.
Oh, that is a gut punch. You can't wait to be comfortable to start speaking because the speaking is what generates the comfort.
The learner who waits is trapped in a paradox. The development of automaticity, the physical rewiring required to think in English, requires sustained imperfect production. You have to open your mouth, allow the messy, unmonitored, sometimes grammatically horrific English to fall out, embrace the panic of the moment, and trust that this exact discomfort is what is wiring the new neural pathways.
Sustained imperfect production. You have to be willing to sound a little bit foolish. You have to take the scrapes and bruises in order to become fluent.
It's the only way.
Okay, let's pull all of this together into a cohesive strategy. We have a three-pronged attack now. We need the daily internal monologue for low-stakes pathway activation. We need massive comprehensible input to build the underlying conceptual infrastructure. And we need high-pressure speaking practice to force the brain to use the direct routes.
That's the formula.
But let's be realistic. If a learner tries to do this for every single topic in their life, all at once, if they try to narrate their whole day, read astrophysics in English and debate politics on day one, they're going to burn out in 3 days. The cognitive load is impossible. Where should a learner actually begin this rewiring process?
You have to be deeply strategic. And the strategy is based on that neurological quirk we discussed earlier. Direct processing develops domain by domain. Because of this, the most efficient, least frustrating strategy is to start where you already have the most exposure, where the concrete is already deeply poured, and build outward from there.
Hacking the domains, starting where the barrier to entry is lowest. Give me some practical, real-world examples of what this looks like for different people.
Let's say you are a professional and you primarily use English in your corporate job. You read industry reports in English, you attend English meetings on Zoom, your project management software is in English.
So work is their strongest domain.
Your professional domain is already highly primed with massive input. So your internal monologue practice and your targeted speaking practice should start exactly there. You should start internally narrating work problems.
So instead of narrating my coffee, I might be thinking, the client isn't going to like this timeline. I need to adjust the spreadsheet before the 2 o'clock meeting.
Exactly. Mentally plan the structure of your emails in English before your fingers touch the keyboard. Rehearse your presentations internally while you commute. Because you already have the vocabulary deeply embedded from thousands of hours of passive input at work, shifting your internal monologue in this specific domain will feel relatively easy.
And you'll see progress fast.
You will see rapid success, which builds momentum.
What about someone who doesn't use English at work? What if someone is learning English purely for travel, or their main exposure is entertainment?
If you consume English primarily through YouTube, Netflix movies, video games, or pop culture podcasts, then your strongest neurological domain is informal, social English. So your internal monologue should exclusively target social thinking at first.
Okay, so casually narrating their day.
Narrate your opinions about the movie you just watched. Mentally practice how you would recount a funny, embarrassing story to a friend in English.
You know, it's remarkably like the board game Risk, or trying to expand a territory on a historical map. You don't just randomly drop your troops all over the entire globe and hope for the best. You'd be stretched way too thin.
Oh, that's a perfect analogy.
You establish a strong, fortified capital city in a region where you already have the most resources, like your professional vocabulary or your pop culture vocabulary. You fortify that capital city by shifting your internal monologue and speaking practice there. And then, only once that specific area is secure, automatic, and comfortable, do you slowly and securely expand your borders into the harder, more emotional, less familiar territories.
Secure the capital, then expand the borders.
I love that.
Yeah.
If you try to conquer the whole linguistic map on day one, if you try to think in English about your job, your childhood trauma, your favorite recipe, and your nuanced political views all simultaneously, your brain will rebel against the overwhelming cognitive load.
Yeah.
And you will retreat entirely back to your native language.
Okay, so we have a comprehensive strategy. We set up this targeted, domain-specific practice. We are narrating the internal monologue. We are consuming massive input instead of flashcards. We are forcing high-pressure output. And we are expanding our territory domain by domain like a game of Risk.
It's a lot of work,
But
it's the right work.
so the ultimate burning question every single listener is asking right now is, how long does this take? If I do all of this, what does the actual timeline for success look like?
We must provide honest, biologically realistic timelines. This is not a fluent in 30 days life hack that you buy on the internet. It requires literal, physical, biological remodeling of the brain.
However, if a learner commits to the deliberate practices we've outlined, the input, the unedited output, the internal narration, it typically takes 3 to 6 months of sustained practice to experience the first consistent moments of spontaneous English thinking in their primary targeted domain.
3 to 6 months to secure that first capital city. That is incredibly reasonable when you consider you are rewiring an adult brain.
It is. But full generalization, the ability to think in English automatically across all domains, including deep emotional conversations, highly abstract philosophical debates, or emergency situations, that takes months to years of continued deliberate expansion.
It's a long, sustained journey, but there must be signposts along the way to keep people motivated. How does a learner know it's actually working before they reach that final, distant destination of total, effortless fluency? What are the specific milestones of progress they should look out for?
There are 4 very distinct, universally reported milestones that learners experience as their brain rewires. The first is a moment of pure, startling surprise.
Oh, I like surprises.
You will be going about your day completely relaxed, and you will suddenly catch yourself having formed a thought in English without consciously trying to. It will just pop into your head.
Like you drop your keys on the sidewalk and your brain immediately fires off, oh man, or a curse word in English instead of the equivalent in your native language.
That is exactly it. That spontaneous, unprompted emergence is milestone 1. It proves the direct pathway is functional.
Okay, what's next?
The second milestone is a shift in preference. You will be trying to explain a complex concept, maybe a work problem, and you will find that the English version of the thought actually feels more natural or more precise than the native language version.
Wow, really?
Yes, the direct pathway has become temporarily stronger or more efficient than the L1 pathway for that specific concept.
That's a massive psychological shift. When English stops feeling like a heavy burden you have to carry and starts feeling like a sharper, more precise tool you actually prefer to use. What's the third milestone?
Dreaming in English.
Ah, the classic, the holy grail. Everyone wants to dream in their second language.
And for very good neurological reason. You cannot deliberately induce a dream in English through willpower. It is entirely a byproduct of deep background processing. When you start dreaming in English, it is the ultimate biological proof that the language has penetrated beneath your conscious effort and has integrated into the brain's automatic subconscious filing system.
That is incredibly validating. You wake up and realize your brain was doing the work while you slept. And the final milestone.
The fourth milestone is genuine bilingual conceptual enrichment. This is a profound, life-altering stage. It is the moment you realize that a specific English expression or a specific English word captures a feeling or an experience far more accurately than any word in your native language ever could.
Oh, wow.
You aren't just translating anymore. You are experiencing the world through an entirely new conceptual lens provided by the new language.
That brings us to the core of everything we've been talking about today. To summarize the mission for everyone listening, there are no shortcuts to this. You cannot hack the translation bottleneck with a flashy new app or a secret grammar trick.
No, you can't.
We are dealing with raw biological mechanisms. Your brain is a physical organ, and language is a physical pathway.
Yeah.
Every single hour of deliberate practice, whether it's awkwardly internally narrating your morning coffee, enduring the sweaty panic of a fast-paced conversation, or soaking in hours of a podcast, is a literal investment in genuine biological fluency. You are physically rewiring your hardware.
And that biological rewiring leads to a rather profound philosophical question, something I think every advanced learner should ponder as they undertake this difficult process.
What is it?
We've established that learning to think in a second language literally rewires your brain's internal monologue. It forces you to abandon the comfort of your native thought patterns, and eventually it allows you to experience emotions and concepts through entirely new frameworks. If that is true, if your internal voice changes, and the way you conceptualize the world fundamentally expands, are you just learning a new way to communicate, or are you actually developing a secondary, distinct version of yourself?
Now that is a thought worth translating. We will leave you to ponder that. Keep practicing, embrace the wobble, throw away those translation flashcards, and we will see you on the next deep dive.